All right. Well, thank you for having me here. It is a pleasure to come and talk about my journey in the science of paleontology and how I got here in the first place. So, without further ado, we'll begin. I will say that I'm just getting over bronchitis, so I may have a small cough. So, ignore that. That's just me trying to get over this bronchitis that I have here. So, with a sip of water, we'll begin. So you always got to start them young. So like most kids really get into dinosaurs. They have this dinosaur phase that they get into, and sometimes they lose that phase, or sometimes they keep that phase when they become adults. Well, I'm the kind of person that definitely didn't lose that dinosaur phase in school. Um, when I was younger, I had different interests, but dinosaurs are the ones that kind of caught my fascination. When I was about 4 years old or about 3 years old, I had this triceratops that my mother's, um, excuse me, that my mother's coworker gave me, and she also gave me this book on dinosaurs, this zoo book on dinosaurs, with the beautiful arts by Mark Hallett. And I also got this dinosaur book as well, another one. These are kind of one of my first introductions to what dinosaurs were and the fascination that I had from them. And on the bottom here is a picture of me and my friend digging up dinosaur bones. I promise you, those are thigh bones of dinosaurs. They look like nothing else. I was a horrible drawer at them at that particular time, but I had an interest in dinosaurs, and that never left me. Everybody in school knew that I had a fascination with dinosaurs, and I just couldn't get away from that fascination. So when I was in the second grade, a fourth grade teacher actually invited me down to her classroom because she actually had an interest in dinosaurs. And every once in a while, we would have a conversation if the Loch Ness monster was real, or if dragons were real, and what our favorite dinosaur was. What just so happens that she had a fossil collection in her classroom. And so she brought me over to her classroom, and I would look over the kinds of fossils that she had in her classroom. And this is a photo of exactly what that fossil collection looked like. And I was just fascinated by the variety of fossils that she had. She had fossil coral, she had fossil plants. The thing that stuck out to me the most on the left is that trilobite. And that really kind of caught my fascination with paleontology and everything there was about the history of the planet because it looks so alien like. In 2006, my father took me to the Fernbank Museum of Natural History in Atlanta, Georgia, and I got to see this huge skeletons of these South American dinosaurs, Argentinosaurus and Giganotosaurus. This was an exhibit called the Mesozoic Hall or the Mesozoic Hall of Giants, and it's still here to this day. And I still get blown away by looking at these huge skeletons as I did when I was about 7 years old. And that kind of really kind of stuck in my mind. It was like, wow, maybe I do want to study fossils. Maybe I do want to become a paleontologist. But what really connected my fascination and what it really all connected together with me wanting to become a paleontologist was I had a new fascination, and that was rocks and minerals. So when I was playing around on recess, I eventually just cracked open a rock and it broke open. And I saw these shimmering crystals of quartz, mica, and feldspar. And it really caught my fascination. Okay, I was like, well, rocks. Okay, in order to understand dinosaurs, to understand the planet, I have to understand geology. And so I began collecting rocks and minerals as a kid when I was probably around maybe 15, actually maybe earlier than that, when I was like 13, 12 years old. I began collecting rocks and building a collection. So this is when I started to understand the science of geology, and it really was that connection between dinosaurs and rocks that kind of, you know, connected my fascination with understanding paleontology. That in order to understand fossils and dinosaurs and where they came from, I kind of have to understand the earth. And so I began collecting minerals and understanding and reading books on geology as a youngster. And these are just some of the books that I've read as a small child. I started with, a little bit of small simplified books on fossils, And then it started to get more advanced when I was in the second grade. I started to read more about geology and about understanding the earth. And so these are just a few books that I've read as well, mostly getting identification guides to fossils and to minerals and understanding how to identify them in the field and also how to identify them while just wanting to read as much as I can about them. So books played a role. Excuse me, I read as much books as I could. I spent hours and hours and hours in the libraries reading as much books as I could about fossils and about dinosaurs and about geology. But I also had a fascination with books and also with movies. So of course I've watched a lot of Jurassic Park, but I also watched of geology documentaries like How the Earth is Made from the History Channel or Geological Journey and the Rise of the Continents. These were variety of geology type programs that watched as a youngster, and I still get a twinkle in my eye every time I see these because they bring back such a joy of when I first started to get interested in geology. So I had my own notebook as well. I would spend a lot of time going into the index and the glossary, just really just writing down definitions, as much definitions as I could of words pertaining to geology and paleontology, words that I needed to know as a scientist. So I began to create a whole notebook and print out as many articles as I could on this stuff. And it really was something that I really wanted to know more about. And I began creating whole big notebooks of this stuff as a youngster. But I didn't just do that. I wanted to teach people about geology. I wanted to teach people on how to identify rocks and minerals and about my passion, my newfound passion in geology. So I began to create videos. I got inspired to create videos as a kid when I was about 12 to 13 years old. I had this camcorder that my mom bought me from a Radio Shack. And I had this stool, and I would stack books on top of the stool to kind of reach my height and put the camcorder on top. And I would do presentations in that way, talking about geology um, to people. Unfortunately, though, many people did not find that particular fascination interesting. I was bullied a lot as a kid. I was beaten up. I was thrown into a trash can. I was called horrible, horrific names. Um, and actually, this particular photo is a Spinosaurus tooth that I had bought from the museum a while back when I was in eighth grade. And I wanted to show it off so bad. I was super excited and I wanted to show it off. And so I decided to you know, give it to people to see how cool this dinosaur tooth was. And when I got it back, it was broken in half. So someone had taken the tooth and snapped it in half and gave it back to me. And unfortunately, I was just devastated because this was like the first real fossil, dinosaur fossil that I had in my own personal collection. And someone just broke it in half. And it just completely, I broke down into pieces because this was something that I loved. And why would anybody do this to a fossil on purpose? But that's okay. I glued it back together. So I'm also on the autism spectrum, and I struggled a lot with social cues and finding friends. And so I used paleontology as my coping mechanism for being bullied. Um, if I was being bullied in school or outside of school, I'll turn to paleontology as my coping mechanism because it was the only thing that I had at that time. And it's still my coping mechanism. I'm an adult with autism now, and being on the autism spectrum has allowed me to communicate better because of my fascination with paleontology. So, over the years, I've noticed that there are not a lot of museums talking about fossils from the state of Georgia. Um, if have you known, I'm from the state of Georgia, and Georgia has a rock record that goes back at least that goes at least about a billion years, so 1.1 or 1.2 billion years. Georgia has a fossil record that goes at least half a billion years, so about 516 million years. And you can learn a lot about that history through looking at the rocks and state parks and our interstates. There's geology being passed by you all the time. You may just not recognize it, but there is. There's 500 million years in our state. And I noticed that there really wasn't much talk about that particular history from the state of Georgia. So, just to give you an introduction, some of the fossils that we have here, we have a variety of different types of fossils, from invertebrates to vertebrates to plants. We've got one of the oldest known whales, Georgia cetus. We've got old fossils like archaeocyanid sponges. We've got dinosaur fossils. We've got sharks. We've got brachiopods. We've got a lot of great stuff here in the state of Georgia. And I wanted to make sure that kind of everybody knew that we've got really good fossils here. When you think of paleontology, you definitely don't think of Georgia. You probably think of places in the western United States like Montana, Utah, South Dakota, but you definitely don't think of the eastern part of the United States, the South as we call it. But Georgia has incredible fossil record. So as I've gotten older, I started to team up with a variety of different organizations to kind of help people spread awareness of the paleontological history we have in our state. So I got connected with these various different organizations to talk about that. So first, I started at the Fernbank Science Center and the Fernbank Museum of Natural History. These are kind of like my local museums. Excuse me. These are my local museums, and I've acquired a large personal fossil collection. Most of that is invertebrates, but there are vertebrates as well. Um, but I've acquired this collection of fossils where I've been able to talk to the community about the importance of paleontology and geology in our state. And not just our state, not just in our state, but within the history of life on Earth. We have an incredible diversity of life that is recorded within the rock record. And I kind of wanted to make sure that people kind of learn the cool stuff that we have in the rock record, because we've got some really really cool stuff here. So I started to get connected with the Fernbank Science Center as well as the Fernbank Museum of Natural History to bring my collection in and to talk about that with a variety of different people in our community. I've also been able to go to a variety of different schools. This is the Puckett's Mill, excuse me, this is the Puckett's Mill Elementary School in Tequila, Georgia, where I, again, brought my collection and I talked about the history of the Earth through the fossils that I had in my collection. And then I was also to go to the Mansfield Elementary School, which is actually where my former second grade and third grade teachers are now. And I was able to go into the classroom and talk about a unit on dinosaurs. So that's just bringing in the stuff that I have from my personal collection and bringing that in and teaching the community, young kids and young adults who will be the future of science, and talking about that to the general public. And they've gotten a lot of really great insight of the history of the planet just from what I have in my personal collection. Because of COVID, I've been doing a lot of virtual outreach. I can't get around as much as I could before COVID. So I've been doing my virtual presentations here, just like the one that I'm doing right now. So I've been actually setting up a table, and I'll actually be doing that in December. But I've had to do many different types of virtual presentations talking about paleontology and geology. And I've been bringing that into classrooms. So a lot of teachers like to do Skype with scientists or Zoom with the scientist, and they like to bring the scientist in their classrooms virtually. And so that's exactly what I've been doing. So they have been using Zoom or using Skype, and I have been able to talk with their classrooms about being a paleontologist and about fossils. I have been on numerous podcasts spreading the word on paleontology and geology and how cool it is. So these are some of the various different podcasts that I have been on over the years. And back in 2017, this was when I was 18 years old at the time. I am now 25. But I was, excuse me, I was the first, the keynote speaker March for Science. I was the youngest keynote speaker for the March for Science, and this was a really, really big deal. And this is when science, and we needed to talk about the importance of science education and how science is important to our society and to the government. So I decided to give a talk on that. In 2019, I was able to give my first poster presentation at the Geological Society of America. This was like my first, in fact, it was my first scientific conference that I ever went to, and I was fundraised to go to this particular conference, and I was able to do a poster with the organization called Time Scavengers. They're an organization that posts a lot of really good content on science communication as well as aspects of climate change, evolution, and geologic time. And in 2020, I won the Catherine Palmer Award for my science communication efforts for the science of paleontology and geology, and the things that I have been doing on my own time with the science of paleontology. And this was a really great award that I won. It was like a really big moment to be like, okay, I'm doing something good here. Um, so I was awarded this particular award for my contributions to paleontology as a non-professional. And I am still the youngest person to win this particular award, and I'm the first African American to win this award. Excuse me, the from the Paleontological Research Institute. So I was very honored to receive this back in 2020. In 2021, I had my very first internship at the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science, where I worked under George Phillips, who was the curator of paleontology at the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science. And I worked with him very closely in the lab. I worked with him in the collections, and I also worked with him out in the field, and also doing some science communication in the museum as well. And I learned so much from that particular internship. This was the very first paleontology internship that I had gotten. And I've learned so much and picked up a lot of great things. George is an extremely knowledgeable man, um, and I picked up a lot of really good, excuse me, I picked up a lot of really good things from this particular internship. And back in 2020, I was on a PBS called Dinosaur Apocalypse on Nova. And this was like my very first TV appearance. And so this was something that I was really, really excited about. I have never been on television before, and this was like the very first um, TV appearance that I've ever gotten. And this was just so cool to actually be featured on a television show. So I was really happy about that. And just this year, about a couple weeks back, I published my very first paper. I'm the second author on this really old shark fossil from the state of Georgia. So it's really cool to publish a paper on a fossil that you've been working on in your state. I mean, there's people that publish fossils or publish papers on fossils that, there aren't part of their state or aren't part of their region. But this one is particularly cool because this is the oldest shark discovered in the state of Georgia. It's about, I want to say, over 340 million years old. So this is Carboniferous in age, from the lower Carboniferous. And this is also the very first taxon of Stephocampus discovered in the state of Georgia. And so this is a really, really cool fossil that was just published just a couple of weeks back. And I'm very excited to have been a part of this project, and hopefully will be part of other projects like this in the near future, especially on fossils from the state of Georgia. One of the things that I want to talk about is changing the perception of a scientist. Excuse me. Grab some water right quick. When people look at a scientist, even when you Google a scientist on the internet, you may get this perception. You get this gray, frizzy haired guy with a lab coat and who's typically a Caucasian male. This is what a particular scientist may look like. But I wanted to change the science. I wanted to change the perspective of a scientist of, you know, being an African American or being a person of color or being an ethnic person. And wanted to change this perspective of what a scientist is. This is something that I've been wanting to change for a very long time because when I was growing up, I know that there weren't that many paleontologists or geologists that looked like me. And that kind of downgraded my perspective of what it is to be a scientist. And it really gave me a lot of discouragement. I know when I was a kid, when I was in grade school, um, I told people I wanted to be a paleontologist. And they were like, well, there are no such thing as African American paleontologists. Black paleontologists don't exist. You're not going to become one. Or if you do become one, you're going to be the first one. And I realized that, well, because I didn't find scientists that looked like me, maybe I don't belong in this field. Well, I realized, especially when I went to SVP, um, I realized that there are people that look like me in this field. There are people that do look like me in this field, and I can pursue this particular field in paleontology. So, why am I talking about this? Why is this important to me? Paleontology is very important about understanding past life and about past climates. It helps put things in perspective and regarding the future and where we can fit in into the history of life. Learning about the Georgia's rich rock and fossil record allows Georgians to better understand natural history and about natural resources. And it actually helps other people have an appreciation for natural history. So, unfortunately, I lost my mentor this year. His name was William Montante, and he was my mentor as a kid, well, as a teenager. And he was a paleontologist, and he took me out in the field, and he took me to a formation called the Conosaga Shale, and he gave me this perspective that it's all about discovery. That even though that you're going out in the field, you're finding something that no one has ever found before. You're finding something that everybody will eventually learn to come and understand through a scientific paper or through something that you may post on social media. And so he drilled these words within my brain that it's all about discovery. And going to SVP has allowed me to say that I belong here. I belong in this particular field of science. You know, I may be a little bit different. I don't have a degree. I haven't been a part of a university, but I belong in this field. And it really was that perspective. It kind of changed my whole view point of what it is to be a paleontologist. That paleontologists aren't just people who wear lab coats. They aren't just Caucasian male. They're people who have different abilities and have disabilities. There are people that don't look like a particular person within a paleontology documentary. But this was my perspective when I went to the Society for Paleontology conference. And I'm glad to have been part of such an incredible, diverse, welcoming community of young scientists. So I want to thank you, everybody, for coming to my talk. My social media engines are down below. And if anybody has questions, I would love to answer them, or anybody has comments, I would love to hear them. Thank you.